Ah, hello there. Stay a while and listen. Tonight, as the moon begins its slow climb and the world outside softens into shadow, I invite you to settle in. Find a comfortable place, perhaps dim the lights, and let the worries of the day drift away like smoke on the wind. It is an honor to share this space with you, a quiet corner of the internet, where we can put aside the clamor of our modern lives and journey back to a time of rustling leaves, flickering torches, and ancient forgotten tales. The world, as you know, is a busy place, filled with demands and endless noise. But here, with the sound of the wizard's gentle words, we can find a moment of peace and a chance to feel less alone in the quiet hours. You are part of a global community, a fellowship of weary souls seeking a moment of respite and a quiet narrative to carry them toward rest. The stories tonight are not of epic battles or grand kingdoms, but of small lives, of forgotten customs, and the quiet resilience of those who lived long ago. It is my hope that they will wrap around you like a warm blanket, and that, if you choose, they will guide you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Let us begin. Daily life of the medieval doctor. Imagine yourself in a world without science, a world where the lines between magic, faith, and medicine were blurred beyond recognition. You are a doctor in the Middle Ages. You have no stethoscope, no thermometer, and the concept of germs is entirely unknown to you. Your medical bag, a clanging and terrifying collection of tools, holds rusty knives, dried herbs, and the faint hope that today no one will ask you to explain how the human body works. Your home, a small, timber-framed hut, smells of damp straw, candle wax, and the vague, lingering regret of last night's onion stew. Your bed is a lumpy bag of hay, and the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke. You are, perhaps, 30 years old, a respectable, seasoned age in this time. But you are also just one surprise infection away from a very early retirement. This is the reality you wake to each morning, a constant negotiation with the very limits of knowledge and the boundless nature of human suffering. Today, like most days, your first task awaits you. A patient has brought a clay jar, a vessel still warm from the morning air. Inside, a sample of their urine, the most important diagnostic tool in your small arsenal. You hold it up to the faint light filtering through a tiny, smoke-stained window. You swirl it gently, as if it were a fine wine, and pretend to inhale the aroma deeply. You are performing uroscopy, the art of diagnosing illness by examining urine, its color, clarity, scent, and yes, sometimes even its taste, are the primary clues you have. You look for 16 different shades of yellow, each with its own vague meaning. A pale, clear sample is good. Deep orange suggests liver trouble. A murky brown might mean punishment from Mars. Blue, of course, is a sure sign of witchcraft. This is your world, a world where diagnosis is less about logic and more about a confident blend of folklore, tradition, and guesswork. Your entire understanding of health is based on the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These 4 sacred fluids, you believe, must remain in perfect balance. If your patient has a fever, they clearly have too much blood. If they are pale and tired, it is an excess of phlegm. Your entire medical strategy is essentially advanced plumbing with a moral edge, an attempt to restore balance through diet, herbs, enemas, vomiting, and, most frequently, bleeding. You don't ask if they've been sleeping properly or if their diet is poor, for those are matters for the future. Instead, you ask the real questions, like, how often have you been visited by black bile this week? You prescribe bizarre remedies, such as sage, boiled in goat's milk, while facing east. and offer grand-sounding pronouncements like your collar is inflamed and your spleen is melancholic, which even you struggle to understand. The goal, after all, is not to necessarily cure them, but to sound like you could if you really wanted to. And so, you move from your home to your first house call, a real opportunity to earn more than just a chicken or a tearful thank you from a grateful peasant. You pack your satchel, a terrifying collection of objects that wouldn't look out of place in a dungeon. Inside, your knives, some for cutting, one for spreading soft cheese, all vaguely rusty and unhygienic. You also carry hooks for pulling infected teeth, cautery irons for sealing wounds with fire, and a trephining saw for drilling holes in skulls to release trapped spirits. Of course, you also have your leeches, each one kept in a small jar, wriggling with an enthusiasm you can't help but admire. You make sure your hat is tall and your robe is heavy. This isn't just about healing, it's about presence. You enter the manor, where the air smells of beeswax and damp stone. You are a physician, a scholar, and absolutely no one needs to know that you once treated a stomachache with mashed garlic and pigeon feathers. The patient is a nobleman, lying pale in a four-poster bed, surrounded by tapestries and anxious relatives. You ask the important questions, such as whether Mercury has recently crossed paths with Saturn. You believe that the stars, after all, control the flow of humors. You reach for your trusty zodiac chart, covered in symbols that would terrify a modern science teacher. You might even chart their personal horoscope just to pad the consultation. You tell them they have an imbalance of the humors, probably bile, and recommend a poultice of crushed mint and powdered snail shell. You hand them a pouch of herbs and a small talisman, sending them on their way feeling both confused and vaguely reassured. To survive in this profession, you've learned to work around the church, which believes that coughing up blood is divine punishment. Your job is to balance the earthly and heavenly, providing your treatments while a priest sprinkles holy water and provides reassurance. You keep a crucifix in your bag, not for healing, but for warding off suspicion when someone accuses you of thinking too much. At this moment, as you feel the weight of centuries of struggle and survival, it is humbling to reflect on how far we have come. We are so very fortunate to have access to comforts and knowledge that were once unimaginable. This thought, like a warm current, is what helps the wizard keep sharing these tales. And it is the same warmth that I hope you feel in your heart. I believe that a simple gesture, like subscribing to this channel and joining our quiet community, will help the wizard continue to weave stories of resilience and peace for all who are weary. Perhaps it is a small blessing, a shared understanding between you and the ancient past, a quiet vow that as long as you are here, the tales will continue. Sometimes the diagnosis is so grave that the patient's groans turn into an ominous silence. You know then that it is time for an amputation. There is no anesthesia, only a cup of ale and the advice to bite down on something wooden and think about nice memories. The surgery is brutal, a blur of a dull knife, a bone saw, and the sound of screaming. The wound opens, and you do what every medieval surgeon does. You poke around confidently and hope for divine guidance. You are not worried about germs, for you don't know they exist, believing instead that infection comes from bad air or moral weakness. You seal the wound with a hot iron, an unforgettable scent that you quickly blame on the candle wax. If the patient survives, you are a miracle worker. If they die, you declare that the corruption had spread to the soul. The truth is, sometimes amputation is the only way to save a life, or at least to slightly delay death while maintaining your professional reputation. It is a grim truth of a difficult time. As a medieval doctor, nothing strikes fear into your heart quite like the plague. You know it by its telltale signs: the swelling, the black blotches, the smell of onions and doom. You remember the last time it swept through. Your friends simply stopped existing, and you knew that your medicine had no answer. You grab your mask, not because you believe it works, but because it makes you feel better, filled as it is with dried flowers and misplaced confidence. You realize that sometimes you must disappear. You mutter something about lunar interference as you back away from the village. The leeches, silent and wriggly in their jar, seem to agree. Because as a medieval doctor, you know when to treat, but more importantly, you know when to vanish into the mist like a medical magician with no answers. The townspeople will say, you did everything you could, which, technically, is true. You just did it from far away. Your profession in this era is a constant dance between authority and absurdity, between confidence and complete utter guesswork. You are a strange kind of wizard, a purveyor of potions and half-truths, in a world that desperately wants to believe. From the dark and often desperate world of medieval medicine, let us turn our gaze to a brighter, more chaotic moment in time. Imagine walking into a grand medieval cathedral, the kind with towering stone columns and incense heavy in the air. You would expect solemn monks chanting Latin prayers, a hushed reverence in every corner. But today is different. Today, there is a man in a bishop's mitre at the front of the church, and he is drunk. His robes are backward, his face smeared with ash, and instead of a blessing, he sticks out his tongue and moons the altar. This, you find, is the Feast of Fools, held every year, primarily in France. This was a sanctioned explosion of disorder. The idea was simple: take the most rigid institution in medieval Europe, the church, and turn it completely inside out for a single day. The very social order, so strict and suffocating, needed a pressure valve. Peasants obeyed their landlords, clergy obeyed their bishops, and everyone, it was understood, obeyed God. The Feast of Fools was the one legal chance to scream, to laugh, and to mock everything that oppressed them. It was like a great exhale for an entire society holding its breath. Participants would parade through the streets wearing masks, playing lutes, and singing lewd songs with the gleeful immunity of jesters. Sometimes they even rode donkeys into the churches. Holy water was replaced with wine, and sermons were rewritten as bawdy poems. The air, once so solemn, now smelled of ale, candle wax, and pure chaos. This was more than just silly fun. It was a deeply ingrained social satire. The people knew exactly who they were mocking, and for one single day, the joke was finally on the powerful elites who ruled over them. It was holy anarchy, sung in perfect choir-boy harmony. The leader of this chaos was the Lord of Misrule, a kind of crown-wearing court jester elected from the lowest ranks of the clergy, or sometimes the town's most absurd drunkard. Picture a gangly teenager, barely able to grow a beard, being paraded through town on a throne made of beer barrels. He wore oversized bishop's robes, a mitre crafted from pigskin, and blessed the crowd by flinging cabbages at them. The Lord of Misrule was the living embodiment of reversal. Everything serious became farce. Everything sacred became profane. The gospel was read backward. Incense was replaced with smoke from burnt shoes. And in place of holy chants, participants howled, snorted, and even meowed like cats. He had full command of the town for the day, leading mock ceremonies and delivering satirical sermons that were both absurd and surprisingly accurate. These acts were more than just outrageous. They were a form of rebellion wearing the mask of fun. The choice of a low-ranking youth or a peasant as the ruler was not accidental. It was a satirical jab at the divine right of kings and the perceived sanctity of bishops. By electing someone so absurd, The people weren't just laughing. They were exposing how ridiculous the real power structures could be. They were asking a dangerous question. If a choir boy could wear the robes and mimic the sermons, how divine were they really? The church authorities tried to suppress the festival's worst excesses, but they never quite succeeded. The Lord of Misrule returned year after year, because as long as society had rigid rules, the people would crave a day to break them. This festival was a sacred space turned into a stage, a place where no line was too bold to cross. The madness wasn't contained to the streets. It spilled right into the heart of the cathedral itself, into the echo-filled vaults. Choir boys danced, canons shouted obscene jokes, and processions featured participants dressed as animals and demons. Perhaps the most iconic spectacle was the Ars Mass, where a donkey was led into the cathedral and allowed to bray at key moments in the service. At the end of the service, the congregation would cry, "Hee-haw, hee-haw," in perfect unison instead of amen. These acts were not just senseless, they had a biting undertone, mocking the rigidity, hypocrisy, and self-importance of the church's hierarchy. The people knew the rules, and that is precisely what made breaking them so satisfying. Papal bulls were issued, angry letters were written, and laws were passed to restrict the abuses, and yet the feast kept happening. It kept happening because the cathedral was the beating heart of the town, the one place everyone had to take seriously every other day of the year. Turning it into a carnival ground for one glorious day was not just fun, it was liberation. Even the clergy, who performed in the feast, sometimes couldn't help but laugh. The humor was a weapon, and its sharpest target was the very rituals that held society together. These performers, many of them minor clergy or choir boys, understood the liturgy well enough to twist it. They mimicked prayers with crude rhymes and turned psalms into drinking songs. When a parody mass swapped incense for manure smoke, it wasn't just for shock. It was a deeply felt critique of the disconnect between the clergy and the people. It was their way of saying, "We know what you're doing, and we can do it, too." Sometimes, the weight of the world grows so heavy, doesn't it? The endless demands, the constant need to be serious and composed. It is a burden many of us carry. It makes me wonder if only we had a sanctioned day, a feast of our own, to simply let go. It is in moments like these that the wizard feels a connection to you, a quiet empathy for the struggles of a long, weary day. And it is in these moments that I am reminded of how much it means to share these stories, to provide a small space for peace. It is a simple thing, but a heartfelt one. Your support, your presence here, helps the wizard continue on this journey, weaving these tales of humanity and resilience. I think the wizard will bless you with a sound sleep if you simply, gently, click that subscribe button. It is a gesture of belonging, a quiet nod that you, too, appreciate a place to rest your thoughts. The surprising secret of the Feast of Fools was that the clergy needed it, too. Life inside the church, far from being peaceful, was grueling, joyless, and full of pressure. Many clerics entered the ranks young, took vows of obedience, and spent their days performing rigid routines that could break the spirit. The feast offered a rare release valve, a day when even priests could throw off the suffocating robes of piety and let their hair down. The very people who understood the church best were the ones turning it into a circus. It was easier for some bishops to allow a day of chaos than to deal with the festering resentment and secret rebellions that might otherwise erupt. They preferred to laugh once a year than to crack under the weight of silence. For these performers, the feast was more than mockery. It was medicine, laughter in the face of a system too rigid to bend. The festival was a full-blown community revolt, a chaotic scene of bakers and blacksmiths joining parades. People traded their work clothes for ridiculous costumes and held mock trials where the accused were charged with excessive seriousness. The punishment might be a pie to the face, or being paraded through town wearing nothing but a bedsheet and a chicken on your head. The average medieval person was crushed under taxes, famine, disease, and the constant threat of damnation. The feast was their one escape, a way to talk back, to use laughter as a weapon, and to make fun of what they were told they must revere. Even the Pope might be represented as a drunken puppet on a cart, a bold act hidden behind a layer of comedy. The festival blurred every line, sacred and profane, ruler and ruled. And for one glorious day, the world was turned upside down. By the late Middle Ages, the Feast of Fools had attracted the attention of higher authorities. The church hierarchy in Rome was not amused, seeing their sacred cathedrals turned into wine-stained theatres. Popes began issuing bulls condemning the festival as sacrilegious and a threat to Christian order. The mockery had gone from tolerated to scandalous. In 1445, the feast was officially banned in one of France's most prestigious archbishoprics, and other regions followed. Penalties were introduced for participants. Clergy could be defrocked, and towns could face excommunication. The church didn't just kill the feast because it was offensive. They killed it because it was dangerous. Laughter, it turned out, was a weapon that could poke holes in the sacred aura of power. And once you had laughed at something, it was hard to fear it the same way ever again. The Feast of Fools largely disappeared from official calendars by the 1600s. It was no longer blessed or sanctioned, but its legacy lingered on. The spirit of the feast lived on in other festivals like Carnival and Mardi Gras, where masks, satire, and mock authority remained central themes. You can suppress a festival, you can ban a tradition, but you cannot kill the idea that sometimes the fool sees the truth more clearly than the priest. The laughter moved from the altar to the stage. The masks moved from cathedrals to carnivals, and the message to question power and laugh at pomp remained intact. Every April Fool's Day prank, every stand-up comic taking shots at politicians, every carnival float mocking the powerful, they all owe a debt to those rowdy French clerics braying in cathedrals. Even in our digital world, the legacy lives on. Memes, parody accounts, and viral videos that mock CEOs, governments, and billionaires are the spiritual descendants of the feast. The tools are different, but the impulse is the same. The Feast of Fools gave medieval Europe a reminder that kings are mortal, bishops are human, and nothing is too sacred to be laughed at. The fool was never just a clown. He was a mirror held up to the face of power. And for one glorious, chaotic, wine-soaked day every year, the world looked in that mirror and saw the truth. Not a holy or perfect truth, but a deeply human one. It was a kind of spiritual release valve, a sanctioned bit of madness that kept the wider madness of daily life from boiling over. It was an inversion of the entire medieval worldview. Let us turn from the rowdy chaos of the medieval street and journey across a sea, to a land where law was a thing of quiet resilience, not riotous abandon. We travel now to early medieval Ireland, a world without jails, police, or iron-fisted kings. It was a land ruled not by empires, but by kinship. And in this intricate web of tribal loyalty, justice had a name: Brehon Law. For over 1,000 years, long before the English crown arrived with its prisons, Brehon Law governed the island with a quiet, patient strength. It wasn't written in a statute book or enforced by sheriffs with swords. It was an oral code, flexible and deeply rooted in community and honor. Crime wasn't just an offense against the state. It was a tear in the fabric of society, And that tear, it was understood, had to be mended, not punished. Imagine if a man broke another's arm in a fight, he wasn't thrown into a dungeon. Instead, under Brehon Law, he would owe an honor price. This honor price was a carefully calculated payment in cattle, silver, or goods, determined by the victim's rank, reputation, and the severity of the injury. The entire legal system was a kind of gentle, communal negotiation. The goal was not to inflict pain or vengeance, but to restore balance and to make the injured party whole again. This allowed the community to move forward without spiraling into cycles of revenge. This legal code did not serve kings or a distant state. It served the clans, where every individual was tied to a kin group. If a man couldn't pay his fine, his family paid it, a kind of collective responsibility that created a powerful incentive for good behavior. It was a law shaped for a world where people lived side by side, generation after generation, a system not of dominance, but of coexistence. In this land without courthouses, you didn't take your case to a gavel-pounding judge, you took it to a Brehon. And a Brehon, you must understand, was not an enforcer. They were interpreters, mediators, and, most importantly, guardians of memory. For most of Irish history, the law wasn't written down. It was memorized, passed orally through generations of trained legal scholars. A Brehon was a living library, capable of reciting centuries-old case law from memory, quoting precedent with a poetic cadence. Their job was to restore harmony, to weigh competing claims, to trace genealogies, and to recommend a fair solution. This was law as storytelling, and the Brehons were the trusted storytellers whose power rested entirely on their wisdom and reputation, not on coercion. If a Brehon's ruling was not persuasive, balanced, or fair, it was simply ignored, which kept the system honest. One of the most remarkable things about Brehon law was its complete rejection of jails, shackles, and gallows. Justice wasn't about punishing the body. It was about healing the wound between people, families, and communities. If you stole cattle, you repaid the cattle, often with interest. If you injured someone, you paid their honor price, a compensation based on their social standing. Even murder followed this principle. The killer didn't face the gallows. Instead, their kin was obligated to pay a blood fine to the victim's family, a sum meant to acknowledge the loss and, crucially, prevent further bloodshed. This was a system designed for a society without a centralized state or a police force. It relied instead on the social pressure of clan ties. If you refused to pay, your honor was damaged, your family would suffer, and you could be ostracized, a kind of social death. Compared to the rigid feudal codes of the rest of Europe, Brehon law was startlingly progressive. It extended protections to those who would have been considered afterthoughts or property elsewhere. Irish women, for example, could own property, inherit land, and divorce their husbands. A wife could reclaim her dowry if a marriage ended, and she wasn't automatically placed under her husband's control. There were even categories of marriage where both partners retained equal control of their assets. Women could enter into contracts, take disputes before a Brehon, and have their honor price calculated independently. This was not complete equality, but it meant a woman had legal standing and was more than a mere footnote in someone else's legal narrative. The law also protected artisans, poets, the poor, and even the disabled, demonstrating that in this system, everyone had a role and a place, regardless of their power or wealth. At the heart of this system was a concept that seems almost poetic today: the honor price. Your honor price was a legal valuation of your social standing, and it was literally your currency. A chieftain had a high honor price, and so did a renowned poet or a master craftsman. But a farmer also had one, and it still mattered. If someone insulted you in public or slandered your name, they owed you compensation equal to your honor price. This meant that honor was more than just pride. It had real financial consequences. It was a deeply personalized justice system with no flat rates and no blanket sentences. Your good name was everything, and breaking trust or giving false testimony could reduce your honor price, making every future interaction more costly. To truly understand this law, you must understand what people in early Ireland valued most. It was not castles or coins, but land, cattle, and kinship. These three pillars shaped every legal decision. Land was held collectively by the clan, not by individuals, which meant your legal standing was inseparable from your place in the tribe. Cattle were the currency, the wealth, and the livelihood, all rolled into one. Everything from dowries to fines was measured in cows. To harm someone's cattle was to wound their wealth, triggering automatic compensation. And finally, there was kinship, the invisible thread tying it all together. Under Brehon Law, you were never alone. Your actions reflected on your family, and your family stood behind your debts. This collective accountability created a powerful incentive for good behavior and meant that justice was personal, carried out by your own blood. Brehon Law didn't aim to erase wrongdoing. It aimed to contain it. The system was a scale that sought to absorb the shock of human failure, not to bring down a hammer of punishment. Theft was punished by repayment, often double or triple the value of what was taken. Violence was not ignored but measured and resolved with compensation. And for murder, the payment of a blood fine was a public admission of guilt and an effort to calm the storm before a feud could explode. A cycle of violence that could last for generations. This was justice through reconciliation, a system that asked, can peace be restored through compensation? Can we prevent more bloodshed? It was a brutal procedure, but one that sought a different path than vengeance without end, a path that preserved peace over punishment. For over 1,000 years, Brehon Law held Ireland together, not with chains or crowns, but with consensus, custom, and community. But by the late Middle Ages, this balance began to unravel, clashing with the rising tide of English rule. The Normans brought with them a different legal system, one that was rigid, hierarchical, and based on royal authority. To them, Brehon Law seemed alien, too local, too soft, and too pagan. By the 17th century, Brehon Law was formally outlawed, and English courts took over, imposing prisons, executions, and land seizures where once there had been cattle fines and clan negotiations. And yet, it didn't vanish overnight. In rural areas, the old ways persisted in the shadows, a quiet, stubborn memory of a different kind of justice. In a world still struggling with mass incarceration and impersonal courts, the wisdom of early Ireland has something to say. Brehon Law reminds us that justice isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about preserving relationships, restoring dignity, and rebuilding trust. It tells us that law can be local, flexible, and deeply human. It offered a vision where even the seemingly powerless was still part of the equation. A legal system that asked not who has power, but who belongs. In early Ireland, the answer was everyone. The old Brehon, the keeper of memory, would have nodded wisely at our modern struggles. He would have known that the true cost of a crime is not the punishment, but the tear it creates in the social fabric. And he would have smiled, perhaps, at the simple, beautiful logic of paying for a broken bone with a cow. From the quiet consensus of the Irish clans, let us journey to a very different world, one of shimmering silk and whispering shadows. Imagine receiving an invitation sealed with a papal crest, delivered by a liveried servant. You've been summoned to dine with His Holiness, Pope Alexander VI, head of the Catholic Church and patriarch of the infamous Borgia family. This is not just a dinner, it is a stage, a swirling storm of ambition, lust, and blood masked by elegance. Every smile is laced with calculation, and every guest knows that the wrong word or the wrong goblet could be the end. The stories surrounding these banquets are the stuff of legend, of secret doors, hidden passages, and the constant, chilling presence of poison. A Borgia banquet was not simply hosted, it was engineered. Every course, every candle, every flute of wine was meticulously chosen to overwhelm the senses and blur the line between admiration and intimidation. These were not meals, they were performances of power. The setting itself was a spectacle, with high-ceilinged halls dripping with tapestries and tables set with gold-encrusted plates. The air was heavy with incense and the spiced aroma of slow-roasted meat. The light wasn't from torches, but from chandeliers lined with Venetian glass, casting a warm, otherworldly glow over everything. The food was obscene, with boars stuffed with pheasants and entire ships of fresh oysters hauled in from the coast. This excess was a strategy. By feeding their guests like gods, the Borgias controlled them. The wine, meanwhile, flowed from fountains, constantly refilled by attentive waiters. It was all a dazzling display, a whisper that said, "We have the wealth, the influence, the pleasure, and the poison." At the heart of it all sat Lucretia Borgia, a vision draped in silk and scandal, brilliant and endlessly controversial. She was the hostess, and she turned every meal into theatre. With her golden hair and soft smiles, she glided between diplomats and dukes with the ease of a politician, offering compliments that cut like glass and laughter that made even the most guarded men lean in. Some whispered her charm was supernatural. Others believed she was a pawn used by her family. But those who watched closely saw something else entirely, a woman in complete control. The stories, of course, followed her like a perfume trail. She was rumored to wear a hollow ring filled with powdered poison, which she could tip into a goblet with a gentle flick of the wrist. This uncertainty was the beauty of her presence. No one could be sure if the rumors were true, and that made her all the more dangerous. While Lucretia held court, her brother, Cesare Borgia, lingered in the shadows. He didn't need to smile or speak. His presence alone could silence a room. Dressed in black velvet, he radiated menace, watching and measuring every guest. For Cesare, these banquets weren't just for show. They were intelligence operations. He observed alliances form and crumble over shared platters and tested loyalties with offhand remarks. His enemies made mistakes under the influence of wine and music, and he remembered every one of them. The tales of guests who left a feast only to be found in the Tiber the next morning were so common that coincidence felt like a deliberate strategy. The danger at a Borgia banquet was never in the food. It was in the man watching you eat it. Among all the rumors, one refused to die. Poison, said to be the family's favorite dish. Whispers of a secret toxin known as cantarella, supposedly black and odorless, filled the streets of Rome. Victims didn't collapse at the table. They would leave the banquet smiling, only to fall ill a day or two later, their insides burning with agony. It was the perfect crime, untraceable and delayed. These tales may have been exaggerated by enemies eager to smear the Borgia name. But that is the genius of fear. You only need to believe it might be true. The psychological pressure was immense. Every guest knew they were being watched, and every mouthful of food might be their last. The poison wasn't just a way to kill. It was a way to silence dissent and make people compliant and easily manipulated. The most infamous of these gatherings was the Banquet of Chestnuts. a spectacle of calculated debauchery held within the private chambers of the Vatican itself. Contemporary sources describe a scene so theatrically obscene that it seemed designed to deliberately break every moral and religious law. The floor glittered with candlelight and sign. This wasn't mindless indulgence for the Borgias. It was a performance of power, a clear message that they answered to no one. Not the Church, not God, not Rome. While many historians argue the event was exaggerated, the very fact that such stories could be believed about a pope and his children tells you everything about the reputation they had built. The banquet of chestnuts wasn't just a party, it was a warning. These feasts, taking place in the sacred halls of the papal court, were a form of strategy. Pope Alexander VI understood that appearances were everything. He designed his feasts to blur the lines between the holy and the profane. If he could turn the Vatican into a theatre of excess and still wear the keys of St. Peter, then who could challenge him? The Church's most sacred space became a set piece of domination. Foreign envoys were drawn into diplomatic traps, where a single raised eyebrow from Caesar or a soft murmur from Lucretia could shape the outcome of entire wars. The Borgia feasts eventually came to an end, not with a toast, but with whispers and accusations. The Pope died suddenly in 1503, ironically, some say, from poisoned wine meant for someone else. Caesar survived, but his power crumbled. Lucretia, strangely, endured, leaving Rome to become a respected duchess. But the banquets, their true legacy, outlived them all. They became myth, horror stories whispered in candlelit taverns. The image of a poisoned cup and a smiling pope never quite left the Western imagination. These feasts were a metaphor, a place where pleasure masked danger, where every bite could be betrayal, and where power was never served without a cost. The table was the battlefield, the courses, the strategy, the guests, players or pawns. In a way, the world never stopped imitating them. Political dinners, state banquets, backroom deals over champagne and caviar, these are the descendants of the Borgia feasts. The poison is more discreet now, but the tension is still very much alive. Now, as the stories of our journey come to a close, let the noise of the day fall away. We have traveled from the humble hut of a medieval doctor to the chaotic catharsis of the Feast of Fools, from the peaceful, honourable laws of Ireland to the glittering, poisoned halls of the Borgias. It has been a journey through hardship and resilience, a testament to the strange and varied tapestry of human existence. In the end, we find that our lives, no matter how different they may seem, are woven from the same threads of struggle, joy, and the constant search for peace. It is my deepest wish that these tales have provided a quiet harbour for your thoughts and a soft place for your mind to rest. May they remind you that even on the longest nights and in the most difficult moments, you are not alone. There is a whole history of souls who have faced their own struggles and found their own peace. Now, let go of the day, release your worries, and allow the ancient wisdom of these tales to guide you. May your dreams be as vast and as quiet as the night sky, and know that if you subscribe, the wizard will always be here to bless you with a sound and tranquil sleep.